Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. I know it's been a little bit of time since I've uploaded a video, especially to my actual channel, but Homefront is deploying November 27th. That is the upcoming winter expansion for Cards. This is the expansion that the World Championship is going to be played on, and we are getting into the card reveal. So we're going to see some exciting new stuff, so new keyword, couple new mechanics, and we'll get into the themes of each of the nations and look at the first 19 cards that have been revealed so far. So yeah, let's talk about that. You'll get my reaction and mainly the perspective of how good are these cards going to be in a competitive ladder sense for the standard format. But as well as I'll try to comment on if these cards are going to be really good in draft or at low ranks for like low rarity cards, stuff like that. So with all of that being said, let's roll the intro and jump into Homefront.
What a performance there by J King.
J King, full plot armor.
J King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J King is our world champion. J King 7. What? The back-to-back Cards world champion.
Alright, so as I said, Homefront is deploying on November 27th, so not that far away. And with the expansion, of course, there is the card rotation. Now, I did a video with Bear and Core, which was collabed with this channel, so you should have seen it in your subscription feed. But in case you didn't, go over to Bear Gardner's channel and watch it over there. I gave all of my thoughts on the rotation along with Bear and Core, so I will not be rehashing that here. But just so you know, there is a rotation in case you missed that, so you should go watch that video to see what cards are leaving, what cards are coming back, and, you know, what I think about that. But here, today, we are going to be talking about Homefront. This is the pretty art for Homefront. This is the expansion. You have the symbol with the flag waving on the cards. I'm not entirely sure why they chose Empire Strikes for this this image here, since Empire Strikes is not getting rotated back. It's currently sitting in Classic, but okay. I guess they just liked the art and the context of the art. But anyways, so what is the new mechanic? So the new mechanic for Homefront is Bond. And Bond takes a little bit of explaining. So, when you play a Bond card from your hand, your HQ takes morale damage unless you controlled a unit of the same nation at the start of your turn. So, before we explain the rest of this, morale damage is just renaming fatigue damage. So, this is... I wish they'd come up with a different word than damage to refer to it. I know you are taking damage to your HQ, like that's how it works, but fatigue damage, and I'm probably just going to continue to call it fatigue damage because, like, let's be honest, it's fatigue damage. But fatigue damage doesn't trigger, like, when your HQ takes damage, or something like push, where it's like how much damage your HQ has taken this turn, and it gets around things like Persian, where it's you can't die if you have Persian in the front line, but you can die to fatigue damage. So, like, I wish they just didn't call it damage, and, like, just called it morale or something, and it's like your HQ loses health, rather than your HQ takes damage, because then it makes sense why it doesn't, like... get around other stuff. It still wouldn't work with things like Persian, but like, yeah, I don't know. At least just make it very, very clear how it works in like the encyclopedia, so a new player coming to the game doesn't have to learn the hard way that fatigue damage does not work with other cards. But anyways, basically they've just renamed fatigue damage to morale damage. So this is your HQ takes fatigue damage. So when you play a card with Bond, and you take the damage, you will take 1 damage the first Bond card you play, you will take 2 damage the second Bond card you play, you'll take 3 the third Bond card you play, etc. And once you get down to actual fatigue, like once you run out of actual cards in your deck, if you triggered the damage on 3 Bond cards, the first fatigue you draw will be 4 damage. Or the vice versa, if you run out of cards in your deck and then you draw a card, you take 1 damage, and then you play the first Bond damage, you take damage from Bond for the first time that game, you'll take 2 damage. So it is tied to, like, the rest of your fatigue thing. And then how do you not take damage? Well, you have to start the turn with a controlled unit of the same nation. So at the start of your turn, it will check, do you actively control at the start of your turn a unit of this nation? And if so, for the rest of your turn, all of your cards with bond of that nation in your hand will be deactivated, meaning you do not take the damage when you play it. Deactivated in this case is a good thing. Now, you can trade off that unit before playing your bond cards, and that's perfectly fine. Once you have bond for that turn, there's no way to lose the deactivation of bond for that turn. However, the next turn, it's not like you deactivate it in your hand once and then it's deactivated until you play it. It will be deactivated for that turn. So this is a relatively confusing effect. This is probably the most confusing mechanic Cards has ever had. So I hope I'm doing a good job of explaining it. I hope 1939 is doing a good job of explaining it. But I know some of you might just need to like get in and play with the cards to really like get a firm grasp of how it's working. But basically, the gist of Bond is it's a negative effect because you take damage, but you can't even synergize it with like take damage cards. It doesn't work with self damage because it's morale damage, which doesn't trigger stuff. And unless they're changing that, but they have not said if they are. So basically, you just take increasing amounts of HQ damage unless you are able to stick units of that nation on the board. So some other stuff about Nations at War. There is 87 cards. This is pretty standard for the full like card set size these days. And of course, there's going to be cards for all 5 main nations and all 4 minor nations. This expansion celebrates how nations mobilized their people, bolstered morale, and stood shoulder to shoulder in the face of war. Expect nation-specific cards that capture the essence of cooperation, unity, and resilience on every front. This is quite important. So Cards features a range of keywords, but for the first time we are defining a specific subset of keywords, and that is combat keywords. So Ambush, Blitz, Fury, Guard, Heavy Armor, Shock, and Smokescreen are now combat keywords. So you're going to see a lot of cards from Homefront that refer to combat keywords, either checking if a unit has some or giving combat keywords to a unit, and that is going to be all of the keywords that directly impact the game when 2 units attempt to fight each other. So it's pretty straightforward. There is obviously other keywords that might tangentially affect combat, like, say, Mobilize will eventually grow the size of a unit. That will affect its stats in combat, or Pincer can give combat keywords, like there is like Pincer Blitz that will give a combat keyword, but Pincer itself is not a combat keyword. So yeah, it's a little confusing, but again, Ambush, Blitz, Fury, Guard, Heavy Armor, Shock, and Smokescreen. Now, each nation has its own specific flavor, so Britain finds strength in Steadfast Infantry and Continuity. We'll find out what that means. Germany retools battlefield tactics with units returning to hand, so everybody's favorite mechanic for Germany, returning to hand. However, we'll see how this works as a archetype, because, like, Comet is really, really good. And that's, like, basically it. And then Soviet Union doubles down on ferocious combat keywords. So Soviet Union is getting the combat keywords archetype. Hopefully this doesn't suck, because Soviets tend to do very, very poorly when it comes to dedicated archetypes being pushed by new expansions. The US inspires its forces through upgrades from within the deck, so US is just like improving the quality of their units in deck. We'll see at least one card from that in the first video here today. And then Japan masters removal, striking with precision and purpose. So Japan's theme seems to be removing stuff, and not destroying stuff, but like specifically removing stuff. So like Sendai Regiment or Kyoto Regiment or Isolation, this type of remove from battlefield stuff. And then France rises with a reworked resistance embodying defiance and courage. So as we saw in rotation, all of the resistance cards are coming back, and they have now confirmed that those resistance cards are being reworked, but we don't know what the reworked resistance cards looks like yet. And then Italy, Poland, and Finland also receive new reinforcements that expand their arsenals and strengthen their place in a global strategy. So they're like, Italy, Poland, and Finland get random stuff. And that honestly is probably a good thing, because it's really, really difficult to make a unique archetype with like the 3 or 4 cards that the ally nations are going to get. So honestly, it's better to just be like, we're going to give them 3 strong cards that could fit different strategies. And that's perfectly fine. And then, yeah, so the spoiler season has started. More and more of these cards will be revealed, so expect more of these videos talking about the new cards coming forward. But that is enough of me yapping about stuff surrounding the expansion. Let's get in and actually look at the first 19 cards revealed for Homefront, which, again, coming out November 27th. Alright, so the first card up here we have is the Valentine Mark II. So it is a British standard tank. 2 cost, 2, 3, 1 operation cost, so it's got the honey stat line. But it has very unhoney-like keywords. So the first keyword is bond. So again, if you have a British unit of any type on board at the start of your turn, and then you play Valentine, nothing happens, and you can completely ignore bond. It is just the card. Now, if you start the turn without a British unit in play, and you play Valentine, you will take a fatigue damage, or a proc of fatigue. So you'll take 1, and if it's your first bond, you'll take 2 on your second bond, etc., etc. Now, practically, the way bond is intended to work, or like at least the way bond is being designed, it seems, is to create a overpowered card, and then you put bond on it so that it's like a drawback. And like obviously so that it's not necessarily overpowered because it has bond on it. But the point is, you will have a card that, like, for its cost is really, really good, or it will have a very, very powerful effect that is not on any other type of card, except you take fatigue damage, and then you can't run all of these cards, because unless you just are able to stick units on board all the time, then you will just take increasingly large amounts of damage, and you probably don't want to trigger bond more than 3 times. Because at 3 times, that's 6 damage taken from your own cards. After that, it's 4 damage. For the 4th one, that's getting very difficult. You've taken half your starting health from your own cards in a burn meta. I mean, we don't know what the meta is going to look like once Homefront comes out. But unless Homefront comes out with a lot of healing, burn is probably still going to be relevant to a certain extent in the meta. So you probably don't want to trigger bond more than 3 times. But with how much more powerful bond cards are, and then also sometimes you don't take the damage for playing the bond card, yeah, we'll get into it as we see more bond cards. But the first bond card, sorry, like sort of stopped in the middle of talking about the Valentine, is Bond Fury. So it's a 2-credit 2/3 tank with Fury. With deployment, gets Blitz if you deployed a British infantry last turn. So a 2-credit 2/3 Blitz Fury tank is quite good for a nation that is well known for its combination with Fury cards and buffing those Fury cards. So looking at stuff like buffs, looking at stuff like Hummer aggro. Valentine seems like it might fit quite naturally into those decks. I mean, I kind of doubt you'd run it in buffs, because the type of cards you run in buffs don't really work with Valentine. You're not running stuff like Blitzkrieg. But in buffs, you are running the infantry that could work with Valentine. But like again, buffs is basically an OTK deck, and this does not help with your OTK in any way. Whereas in Hummer, you just don't really run the infantry to be getting Blitz on this all the time. And a 2-credit 2/3 Fury without Blitz, I mean, it's certainly better than the Valentine Mark IV, the 3K 2/4 Fury tank that I've seen some people run. It's certainly better than that, because getting it out a turn earlier, getting it out for a credit less, is well worth the health penalty, and like if you had 4 of these in your deck, you're probably not playing all 4 in a game, and if you are, there's a chance that you're not taking the damage on some of them. So like it's a card you'd consider playing in Hammer. But like, are you considering playing Hammer? Probably not. So like in general, I don't think this card is that good. But you know, it's a risky game to print Blitz and Fury on a card that can attack HQ on the turn it is played. But again, this is sort of like an example of how Bond is going to be working. So obviously a 2-credit 2/3 Fury sometimes gain Blitz tank is incredibly overpowered compared to other cards that exist in the game. However, you slap Bond on it, and then suddenly it's fair because sometimes it deals damage to you. So let's take a look at a second British Bond card. This is the Land Girls, and the Land Girls is 2 credits, draw 2 cards. So it's Convoy, but for a credit less. However, it has Bond on it, so you know, if you controlled a British unit at the start of your turn, you take no damage, but if you don't, you take 1 damage on the first one, 2 damage on the second one, 3 damage on the third one. This card, unlike the Valentine, is incredible. This card is absolutely incredible. And let me explain why it is incredible. So, Convoy is 2 credits, or 3 credits, draw 2 cards. And Convoy has seen a ton of play in a wide variety of decks over the years because, as it turns out, 3 credits, draw 2 consistently is the rate. Like, drawing 2 is on rate for 3 credits. Because drawing a card is worth about a credit and a half, so drawing 2 cards and 1 card is 3 credits, and that is pretty standard. Obviously, there is cheaper ways to draw 2 cards, stuff like Lesser of Two Evils, Expansion, Stiff Upper Lip. Cards like this, where they cost less than 3 and they draw 2, but they all have conditions, and sometimes you can't draw 2, or in the case of Lesser of Two Evils, you can draw 2, but then you have to discard a card from your hand, so it's like you only drew 1, kind of. Whereas Land Girls is just draw 2. Now, obviously, you could argue that it's conditional in that if you have, like, 1 health and no British units, you can't play the card because you kill yourself. But if that is the case, then that is a pretty obscure condition. In general, you're just going to want to play 3 copies of the Land Girls in basically any British deck, unless you're Fatigue, or possibly unless you have, like, a lot of other Bond cards. But if you have a lot of other Bond cards, you presumably are playing a deck that is going to be attempting to at least consistently not take the Bond damage. But yeah, no, this card is absolutely insane, and the number 1 deck that comes to mind when I think about this card is British Air, because British Air absolutely runs 4 convoys, because you need the card draw in Brit Air. And the issue with Brit Air is the convoys, as the game has gotten more and more power crept, the playing convoys have felt more and more slow compared to what other nations are doing, because other nations are just consistently taking the front line and then playing like expansion, or like they're doing like Bergman 1-2-3 nonsense and stuff, and like they're drawing cards without losing tempo, or they're drawing cards for much cheaper than Convoy. The Land Girls in Air is amazing, because in Air you typically don't care about your own health. You are typically the more aggressive deck. Plus, you are a deck entirely built around maintaining board control with British units, so most of the time you're probably not going to be triggering the bond on the Land Girls, so it's just 2 credits draw 2. But like, again, if you're an Air deck, this might be the only Bond card in your entire deck. I mean, we'll have to look at all the Bond cards. Maybe there's some Air-themed Bond cards. But, like, even if these are the only Bond cards in your deck, and it's like, okay, even if you take damage on all 3, it's 6 damage to play, to save 3 credits across 3 cards. That is worth it in Air. So this is just an incredible card in Air, and you're probably going to see this card in every other deck. And this is starting to show my concern with the Bond keyword, is because my concern with the Bond keyword is there are 2 ways to play Bond. One is you just put in the most powerful, like, 3 to 4 Bond cards of your nation into a deck, and you say, I'm not going to particularly try to not trigger Bond. I'm just going to play these overpowered cards and accept taking a little bit of damage as a cost to play these overpowered cards. And in which case you just printed an overpowered card. Like the Land Girls played in a deck with no other Bond cards is just power crept Convoy. I'm sorry. And then the other thing that might happen is you build a deck with a lot of bond cards, and that's going to increase your consistency of hitting an overpowered card early, and that's going to help you snowball, presumably on board. And then if you snowball on board by playing like bond cards, very, very powerful bond cards early, it's going to deactivate the bond on your more powerful bond cards you play into the mid game. And then it turns into like an Alpine-esque type of deck where it's just like, well, I went first, or like I hit the first bond card, or I just like got the first good trade. I'm the one who has the initiative on the board, and because of that, my entire deck is built around snowballing very, very hard. Because, I mean, it will depend on the power level of the bond cards, but like, you know, stuff like Valentine, not that good. Stuff like the Land Girls, incredible. In general, I'm very concerned about this keyword, because this keyword basically just feels like the win more the card. Well, not even like win more, because win more cards are typically cards that are bad from behind, whereas like bond cards are bad from behind depending on the situation. But like think about this: if the best deck in the game is a deck that runs like 20 bond cards, and it's all about just snowballing them down on board with your very, very powerful bond cards, and you play into a mirror, the game will be decided on like turn 2. Because by like turn 2, someone will have board control and someone won't have board control, and the person with board control is just going to be playing increasingly overpowered cards with no downside. And the person without board control is going to be killing themselves very, very rapidly. Because if you're playing a deck with like 20 bond cards and you lose board control, the game's just over, because it's like, oh, I play like 3 bond cards, I take 6 damage to my HQ, and then my opponent either trades out my units, which means I have to like take 9 damage on the following turn playing 2 bond cards, or they go face and win because I dealt 6 damage to myself. Yeah, Bond is a very interesting mechanic. I think that Bond has a lot of potential pitfalls in terms of card design that I'm very concerned with. And I generally think that it's just kind of a keyword that needed to cook a little bit longer. Like, it would have been more interesting. Like, I think it would have been a more interesting design space to have a card that has an effect, and then if you activate Bond by having have Bond be like reversed, where it's, instead of deactivating Bond by controlling a unit, have it activate Bond by controlling the unit at the start of your turn, and then do additional effects. And I guess that still falls into the snowballing on board, where it's like you get more effects for being ahead on board, whereas currently Bond is you don't get negative effects for being ahead on board, so it's fairly similar, but like at least then it's not just like you playing it in a deck that otherwise doesn't synergize with it at all because you just played it for the high power level. But anyways, I don't want to make like a 2-hour video talking about this, so let's just move on to card 3 here. That's going to be another British card, and this one is a 6-credit standard order. And it is Combined Chiefs of Staff. Your British and US units get +2/+3. So this is a big AoE buff. What does this compare to? Well, the closest thing is probably the Alliance, which is your non-USA units get +2/+2 for 5 credits. This card's interesting design space, so it's a British card that gives your British and US units +2/+3, so you're inclined to play it in a British-USA deck or a USA-British deck. But you could theoretically play it in a British deck without USA if you're just all of your units, or the vast majority of your units, are going to be British units. Now, the realities of this card, how are you playing this card? You're probably not, because this card is kind of a hot pile of trash. 6 credits is this is a perfect example of a win more card, because 6 credits is an amount where you're probably not building a board and playing this on the same turn. And also, it's going to be difficult to expand your board even a little bit and play this on the same turn. And it's also going to be difficult to attack and play this on the same turn. So this is basically like, I'm going to get a big board of units, and then on the next turn, I'm going to make those big board of units bigger. And then on the next turn, I'm going to like beat them down with these massive units. Now, the issue is that's not how the game of cards works in a competitive sense, because you play a big board of units, and then if you spend your entire turn making them bigger, your opponent's just going to play a board clear, or they're going to kill you. So yeah, this card is pretty bad. There's like two ways to run this card, I think. One would be in a more aggressive British USA air deck, where you're playing maybe the War Machine, but you're playing a lot of cheap, small air units like gladiators and swordfishes and whatnot, sharks and albacores. So you build up these big boards of units. They're really cheap, so you can play them out quickly. And you're playing like a little bit of ramp, and then you use this as like a big buff card to try to keep your board alive. If there's a lot of damage-based board clears. I don't think that's going to be good, but like that's one way to play it. And the other way to play it is just play it in a full dedicated ramp deck where you're just playing a ton of ramp, so you're going to have a ton of credits, and then you're just going to play like, I don't know, Grenadier Guards, Black Watch, Black Prince, combined Chiefs of Staff, and you have like a massive board. And your deck's going to lose to anything remotely aggressive, but you're going to like absolutely crush control. So yeah, no, this card is pack filler trash. Then we have the 74th Panzer Grenadiers, so a German standard, a 2-credit, 2/3 Blitz Bond. So this is interesting because this shows that the keywords here are being put in alphabetical order. I feel like Bond should be put first, no matter what, personally, just because of the way the card works. Because, I mean, if we see back here, it's Bond Fury, but I guess they just went alphabetical here and did Blitz Bond. But anyways, that's a little bit of a nitpick. So it's a 2-credit, 2/3 infantry with Blitz and Bond, and deployment, send a friendly unit to your hand, gets +1/+1 if you do. So unless we see like some absolutely incredible cards to be returning to hand, like cards that are like costs 0 if returned to hand, or they continue to stubbornly not change the evasive action card, the 2-credit returned this unit to hand, it costs 0 this turn. If they continue to like stubbornly refuse to change that so that it doesn't cost 0 the entire rest of the turn, because that's very inconsistent with how cards work. But that's another conversation. Maybe there's like a world you run it with that, but then like why would you not just still run it with like Sally and, I mean, Comet's gone, but something else. In short, I think this card is absolute trash. I saw some of like the earlier reactions, and I saw a lot of people being like, this card's broken, like this card's gonna get nerfed. If this card didn't have Bond, I still think it would be bad. But also this card has Bond. Like, this card confuses me. Like, unless they were, like, printing, like, a lot of cards in this expansion for Germany that say when this gets returned to hand, cost 0, or, like, when this gets returned to hand, gain an additional effect when you replay it, or when this gets returned to hand, do an immediate effect. Like, when this gets returned to hand, deal 2 damage to all enemies, something like that. Like, unless there's, like, actually proactive or at least higher value reasons to return something to your hand, other than, like, I can Leopold and then return Leopold to my hand to Leopold again later, but I lose Leopold on board. Because that's not a good use of this card. That is not a good combo. And even if that was a good combo, there are better ways to return a friendly card to hand than a 2-credit, 2/3 that you're not going to have the credits to attack with, so the Blitz is irrelevant and it takes damage. Yeah, I genuinely don't understand this card, but they said Germany's theme is going to be returning stuff to your hand, so, like, presumably there's going to be cards that make this card not suck, but I don't understand the reaction of people thinking that this card is good based on what we have seen so far, because there's nothing we've seen so far that makes me think that this card is anything other than, like, absolute hot trash. And, like, and it has Bond, so you can't even be like, well, you can play it for the 2-credit, 2/3 Blitz, because, like, it's not Alpine, it's not... it only gets the buff if it returns something, so it only gets bigger if you get a tempo loss, and also it takes damage. Yeah, I don't know. This card's trash. Then we have Night Attack, which is a special, a 3-credit German order special. Remove a unit from the battlefield, then return it with Blitz and Shock, send it to hand, end of turn. I don't know why they couldn't fit the word at the, or the words at and the into this to say send it to hand at the end of turn, or send it to the owner's hand at the end of turn. Like, again, it's their dedication to keep everything in 3 lines of text. If you're going to be releasing, like, new mechanics like bond, and in like you're trying to do interesting design space, the 3 text limit is so stifling. And it's just leading to, and it's not even stifling design space because they're releasing cards like this. It's stifling communication to the player. Like they are valuing making interesting cards over communicating cards effectively, and they're valuing keeping all cards to 3 lines of text over both of those things. But anyways, the actual card is, again, remove a unit from the battlefield and return it with Blitz and Shock. Send it to hand at end of turn. This is very comparable to Rapid Engagement, which is remove a unit and return it with Blitz. And people have used that to attack with a unit twice in a row, or to give a unit Blitz. Now, there's the cards that you would want to do that with kind of don't exist anymore, because we see Comet is rotated, Henschel got nerfed to not deal double damage to HQs anymore. Those are kind of like the big 2 things. I'm sure there's like a combo deck that you can do with this. Now, unlike Rapid Engagement, this gives it Shock, so you could actually like trade out with it instead of going face. So you could play this as a like going for value trade. Like you value trade something and then you repair it to full health and give it Blitz and Shock, and then you value trade something else, and then unfortunately it returns to hand, which like again, maybe that's going to be a good thing for Germany. Maybe they're going to have cards that you want to return to hand, but like at the moment, I don't know, like people keep saying like, oh well, like Germany has so many deployment effects, like you do this on like a Henschel, or you do this on a Panzer Grenadiers, or you do this on the other Panzer Grenadier, and then you get to play it again and trigger its deployment effect again. But like in card games, tempo is king. Tempo is always going to be king over value. Not always, but like 99% of the time, tempo is going to be king. So like you would rather not have to spend 6 additional credits to get your unit back on board. You would rather just have your unit on board and spend your credits doing something else that affects the board. And that's more in reference to just the general concept of returning stuff to hand. Now, obviously, in this case, if you played a card that like does something proactive and then it returns to hand, like the returning to hand is more of a downside to this card, but like maybe it's a downside you are willing to pay if there's like adequate compensation for returning it to your hand. Or you could just like play this as, I mean, like the Shock only matters if you're trading, so this is just worse Rapid Engagement if you're trying to use it as a combo card. Now what is interesting about this is you can play it on an enemy unit, and then as just a 3-credit retreat card, which is very, very inefficient because it doesn't even retreat immediately, so you can't like play this to get through guards unless it's moving the guard on the board. However, you could theoretically play this as a retreat card because you turn their unit, you give your unit their unit Blitz and Shock, and then it retreats at the end of your turn. This is why like additional text would be useful. About like send it to hand at the end of your turn. It says send it to their hand at the end of your turn. Yeah. But anyways, in general, I don't think this card is that good unless, again, there's some really sick payoff cards for returning cards to your hand. Then we have the 77th Guards, which is a Soviet standard infantry 4-cost for a 2/5. And before I talk about what the actual card does, I've seen there's a lot of discussion about the art on this card. Some people say it's AI, some people say it's not AI. I have not seen an official 1939 response about this. In regards to this specific card, I know in the past they have said that they sometimes use AI to create like templates or like stand-in art for cards, and that they have committed that they will not use AI in actual game for like full art cards. Now, I am not an artist. I'm not an expert on AI art. I'm not going to sit here and say this is definitely AI. I'm not going to sit here and say it's definitely not AI. I'm just going to simply say that I hope it's not AI, and if it is AI, I hope 1939 changes it, because I think that, you know, you should pay actual artists to make actual art. But that's all I'm going to say on that. Again, I'm not going to pretend to know with certainty anything about this. I await 1939 talking about this. So the actual card, though, is Blitz and Guard, which is 2 combat keywords, by the way. So it's a 4-credit 2/5 Blitz Guard. So that by itself is absolutely awful. However, it has the passive effect of when you deploy or add a unit, give it a random combat keyword. So this is very interesting. So you're going to want to play this and either stick it, so like keep it around for a turn, like several turns, or you're going to want to play this and then summon like a lot of dudes immediately. And like not necessarily on that turn, but like maybe you want to play this on turn 4 and then on turn 5 like summon like a bunch of tokens to like just get a lot out of this immediately. The issue is the combat keywords on tokens are kind of bad. Like I don't know, like say you're playing like no surrender to summon, and like say you push this to the front line, then you play no surrender to summon 4 tokens. So you get 4 random keywords on tokens. Just like looking at the combat keywords again, like it's where so it's ambush. Ambush on a token's completely useless. Blitz, I mean, probably the most useful one, but like again, you get like a 1/1 to the front line. Fury, absolutely useless. Guard, more or less useless. Heavy armor, more or less useless. Shock, probably useless because it's shock on like a 1/1 that can't attack immediately, and you also have the front line in this scenario. Or smokescreen, which is basically useless. So yeah, giving tokens combat keywords is useless unless you are buffing the tokens, but then it's like, okay, you have to play this guy, and then you have to play tokens, and then you have to try to get the good combat keywords, and then also you have to play a buff, and then it's like, yeah, that doesn't exist, and also the majority of token cards are rotated out. So you're not playing this in a token deck. Now, are you playing this in a deck that just runs good units? Like, you play this on 4, and then on turn 5, you play like a 2-drop and a 3-drop, or like, I don't know, you play like a 3-drop and see what combat card keyword you get, and, you know, if it gets blitz, maybe you do something with that. Or make, you know, I'm assuming that this works so that you can't get the same keyword twice. So if you play a card with blitz already, then like maybe you get shock on it, and you can do a shock trade, or maybe you get fury on it, you can hit 2 things, or you know, maybe you have 2 77th guards, and then you get 2 keywords, and you get blitz and shock, or like blitz and fury. Yeah, in general, I'm not that impressed with this card. It just seems really expensive to pull off something with a random effect, and the average outcome of the random effect seems pretty mediocre. We'd have to see a lot of cards to support this archetype for this card to be worth playing. Then we have another Soviet card, which is Aid to the Front. And this is a potential payoff card, because Aid to the Front is a 1-credit limited order that says give a unit with 2 or more combat keywords +2/+2. So this is 1 credit, give a unit +2/+2. Let's look at it like that first. So let's just assume that all of your units have 2 combat keywords somehow. So this is just a 1 credit, give you a unit +2/+2. That is good. Like, that is above rate. Giving a unit +2/+2 is typically cost around 2 credits. I think that would be fair to say. So 1 credit, give a unit +2/+2. And it can be any unit. This can target bombers. This can target artillery, which are like typically very, very few buff cards are able to target artillery for fairly obvious reasons. Now that's obviously very, very powerful. Now, how often are you going to have 2 combat keywords on a unit? That one is a little less clear, because there's probably either 2 ways you want to use this card. I guess 3 ways you could use this card. One is you want to play this very early in the game, where +2/+2 is going to matter a lot more and is going to help you make just obscene trades or push a lot of damage early in the game. So you would want to play this on like a 1-drop or a 2-drop. Now, you could do that. I'm just trying to think of like what early game cards have 2 combat keywords that you're going to be wanting to use. Because you can lose combat keywords. Like when you lose shock, shock goes away. When you push a smokescreen unit, it loses smokescreen. So it no longer has 2 combat keywords in those situations. So like if you do Cossacks and then push it to the front line, you can't play Aid to the Front on it on the following turn, because now it only has Blitz. Yeah, at least that's my understanding of it. So, like, I'm sure people are gonna like think of cards that could work with this, but like, is it worth playing those cards in a deck? Now, the other question is, how easy is it going to be to give things extra combat keywords? Because this is too slow. Now, if there's like a 0 credit card that's like give a unit a random combat keyword, and then you play a card with like 1 combat keyword, which is probably going to be Blitz, and then it's like, okay, you play these together, and then you get a random keyword, and then you give it +2/+2. yeah, that still seems like a lot of cards for not a lot of payoff. For something that's just going to get routed. So I said there was 3 ways to play this card. That's one of them. The second way to play this card would be in a deck with a lot of card draw, and you're playing this on mid-sized units in the mid-game, but as just a cheap buff, and then you're going to, like, draw a huge hand of cards afterwards, so, like, you're fine playing a lower value card, to just get, like, a small tempo edge in the mid-game, because you have the card draw in your deck to play for that tempo, rather than just running out of cards and losing a card advantage. Now, like, 5-year plan is back. Soviets have a 5-credit draw 5 cards. I don't know if you're going to want to play that in the combat keyword deck, and that's not, like, the most efficient use of, most efficient way to draw cards in the game, but you want to draw a lot of cards and you're Soviets, you don't have a lot of options. And I'm not that impressed by the concept of that deck. I don't know why you would play, like, Soviet control with, like, Italian control cards. That just seems like a better way to play the game. But I'm not that impressed. And then the third way you could use this card would be in some sort of combo OTK where you're using this to kill your opponent, where presumably you play a Blitz and Fury bomber, or fighter, or artillery. Maybe a tank, but probably an artillery. And then you buff up its attack, and the issue with that is if you're using it to kill your opponent in a single turn, you'd rather just play Final Push than Aid to the Front, because Final Push does not require 2 combat keywords, and also gives more attack, and attack's the only thing that's going to matter if you're just sending it into the face. So yeah, Aid to the Front, in general, it's a powerful card, it's a powerful effect. I'm just not seeing the deck it fits into, because it can't fit into any deck. Or, sorry, it can't fit into, like, every deck, just any deck, is what I mean to say. So, like, it's a powerful card that is in a archetype that I'm just not convinced is going to want to run a card like this. But I could be wrong, and also my opinion on this card could obviously change if we see a bunch of combat keyword cards that are really, really good, or, like, very cheap. And the interesting thing about this is adding in combat keywords, this is just a new way to think about the game. So now we'll have to, like, look at every single card moving forward with the idea of, like, how do this be? So, like, for example, the Valentine is a Blitz and Fury, if you played the British Infantry. And then you could do Aid to the Front on that to make it a 4/5 Fury tank. But then you're, like, playing British, Soviet tank buff. And again, why wouldn't you just play Final Push if you're presumably going to go for the OTK? But yeah, anyways, let's just move on to a American card, Magnificent Seventh. Awesome name. It's a 2-credit, 2/4 infantry with a Blitz and Bond. And the passive effect of when this unit attacks, the top unit of your deck gets +1/+1. So, how good is this card? So, giving a unit +1/+1 is cost around half a credit. A 2-credit 2/4 is like the new standard power crept stat line for an infantry. A 2-credit 2/4 with Blitz is really good, so you're getting a fair amount of effect out of a card. 2-credit 2/4 Blitz with upside, but that upside's also, like, down the line because you don't know when you're going to draw the unit, because it doesn't have to be on top of your deck, it's just the next unit on the top of your deck, but your deck's like 5 cards could all be orders, and then you get, like, your +1/+1 unit 6 turns later, and then, you know, +1/+1, it didn't really matter, and you're going to die because you triggered the bond. But, like, in general, it's a lot of stats for a card, and it has bond. And this is presumably being played in a frontline type of US mid-range deck that's very unit-heavy. So there's high chances that you don't trigger the bond. There's high chances that you're going to have a unit drawn immediately with this +1/+1. I don't know. I just feel like Frontline has good cards already, and I'm not convinced that this card makes the cut. It's interesting. I'm just, like, not convinced that giving a random card +1/+1 is worth it. And, like, a 2-credit 2/4, US has lacked 2-drops. So, like, maybe this is, like, a good card to play in Frontline because, like, on turn 1 you play Greyhound, or you play Red Devils, or you play whatever other 1-drop you play. And then on turn 2 you play Magnificent Seventh. You don't trigger the bond. and then it just sits there. The issue with that is you're not using the blitz on either of those two units, and you're also not triggering the effect. And if you play the Magnificent Seventh, your opponent's either going to route it, or they're going to not push up a unit to the front line to allow you to trigger this, because unfortunately it's not like an end of turn trigger or a deployment trigger. It's when attack trigger, which you're not guaranteed, because if your opponent doesn't have the front line, you play 7th, you push it to the front line, and then your opponent just kills it. And then you don't get the +1/+1, and then you just played a 2-credit 2/4. And if you played a 2-credit 2/4 Blitz American unit, that's probably fine. You're probably fine playing that. The issue is if you triggered the bond on it, you're not fine playing that. You do not want to take the damage on this. If you're not triggering the effect and you're taking the bond, this card is terrible. Now, probably you are either triggering the effect or not triggering the bond. So like, I don't know, maybe. I'll try it out in Frontline. I'm not like super hyped on this card though. But like it's probably the best 2-drop unit in US right now. It's definitely the best 2-cost unit in US right now for like a mid-range Frontline deck. The question is, do you care that much about having a 2-drop to play Magnificent Seventh? Then we have the M3 Lee, which is Ambush Bond Smokescreen. Again, alphabetical order is not the way I would have chosen to do this, but that's just me. So the M3 Lee is a 4-credit 4/4 tank, 2 operation cost, special rarity, so it's got the Sherman stats, and Ambush Smokescreen. Interesting combination. And it has Bond, and it has the effect, when this unit moves into the front line, all units in your deck get +1 attack. Now, giving all units in your deck +1 attack is a very, very powerful effect, especially in a very unit-dense deck like Frontline, which is presumably the type of deck that you're going to want to be playing this in. And like, if you play this on turn 4 and then push it to the front line on turn 5, you're probably going to have like 25 to 30 cards in your deck that are units, and giving all of them +1 attack. I mean, hey, 4 credits gain +25 attack. Really, really good. Now, obviously, that's a silly way of looking at what this card actually does. The issue I see with M3 Lee is you were playing Frontline, you have 2 primary issues before generating long-term value, and that is what giving every unit in your attack +1 attack, or every unit in your deck +1 attack, it is long-term value. Now, obviously, it helps you pressure out your opponent, but it also just like helps you make better value trades. It increases the value of your 1-drops that you are drawing later into the game. Now, so like this is a very powerful effect, but there's 2 primary things you want before value in Frontline, and one of those is card draw, and one of those is lethality, the ability to kill your opponent. Now, this absolutely does not replace card draw. You still have to run M4 Shermans. You probably have to run 4 M4 Shermans. So then the question becomes, do you want to run... You're already running 4 2-op tanks, which in the current year is not a good stat line for the cost. It is actively bad. It is slow and detrimental to the rest of your game plan to play one of these guys. Now, obviously, you need to play Shermans because you need the card draw. But then the question becomes, is it worth also playing Lee? Because if you're ever put in a spot where it's like, I can draw cards on Sherman this turn, or I can play Lee, you're going to draw cards with Sherman 99% of the time. Because you might not be able to draw cards with Sherman later. But then Sherman draws you 2 cards, and one of those cards might be a second Sherman. One of those cards might just be a cheaper way to fill out your curve. And then it's like, basically my point is I think Lee is going to be the last card you play in your hand unless you are losing. And if you are losing, then Lee is not a good card. And then the other thing is you want lethality, and typically Frontline does that with 2 or 3 copies of Blitzkrieg, and that's just, hey, if you get a couple units into the front line and then you get a couple Blitz tanks in your hand, you can deal like 12, 15 damage out of nowhere, and that's how you close out the game. And you use Shermans to draw to that point. Now, the problem is Lee doesn't really help with any of that, because Lee does not have Blitz. Lee is very, very slow by itself. Lee is buffing the attack of units in your deck, but not the units currently on board or in hand. So then the question becomes, does Lee replace Blitzkrieg? Like, are you getting the consistency out of Lee to go for the kill with just buffing the attack of your stuff? And I think the answer is no. I don't think this is. I think this is worse than Sherman, and I think this is worse than Blitzkrieg. And I just don't see the world where you are able to run this in frontline with Blitzkrieg and Sherman. Because also you can't even guarantee this works. You could play Lee and then they like hit it with a tactical strike, or a extended barrage, or a lion for a day. Well, I guess that one's rotated, but like a wave for a wave after wave, or like whatever other card they play. And then you just don't trigger the effect. And then also it has bond, so like sometimes you actually take damage to then not trigger this effect. Yeah, in general, I think this is a very powerful card that a lot of people are going to play very early on in the game. But I don't think it's going to be that good in a frontline type of deck. Now, maybe you play a deck with, like, I don't know, like a lot of artillery, and then also you, like, get a way to consistently get to the front line, or maybe you just rely on the fact that you played a lot of artillery, that they dump their removal into your artillery, and then you, like, push up, like, an M3 Lee, and then suddenly all of your, like, 1-3 artilleries become 2-3 artilleries, and that is substantial. Or, like, maybe you build a deck that, like, is able to get this to the front line immediately with Blitz. Or maybe you play a deck that's able to, like, you know, you do something, like, with, like, tactical withdrawal, where you, like, can push it into the front line multiple times to, like, trigger this multiple of times, and then, like, everything in your deck has, like, +4 attack. But, like, there's really fun things to do with this card. This is a fun card that's gonna see play in testing things out, and there's a reasonable chance it could see play in the future in an actual competitive deck. I would just not hold my breath on that. The other thing that's worth noting is it does have 2 combat keywords with the ambush and the smokescreen. The ambush here is really, really weird because it has smokescreen, so they can't attack into it without suppressing it on the turn you play it, and if they suppress it, then it loses ambush as well. So then the ambush really only matters if you stick it, and that also can trigger the effect, and then it's in the front line, and then at that point it doesn't really matter. So the ambush is, like, largely not that important on this card. But yeah, I don't know. That's the M3 Lee. That's my thoughts on it. Let's move on to Japan. What is Japan up to? So they said Japan's theme is going to be removing stuff. The first card we get is Ninth Guards, a card that has absolutely nothing to do with removing stuff. But Ninth Guards is a very interesting card, so let's talk about it. Ninth Guards is a 3-credit, 3/4 infantry, limited rarity, 1 operation cost, with bond and guard. So 3 cost, 3/4 infantry guard, good stat line. Not like amazing stat line that you're going to play it immediately for its stats, but a fine stat line where if it has a good effect that you are going to play it, or at least consider playing it. Now it has bond, which is not that good. As we've discussed, bond is a keyword that is a sign a card is typically going to be overpowered, but obviously you would rather a card not have bond. So this has bond. Now it also has destruction, deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ, give yours +2 defense. So we got healing in Japan. Healing in Japan is back. This is a actually playable card for Japan control. It is a cheap guard that heals. Now, there's obviously some downsides to that, and then some question marks around that. So the downside is bond. So if you're playing a control deck, it's going to be very difficult to guarantee a unit on board, especially a control deck like Japan, which does tend towards the more order side of control decks rather than the sticky unit side of control decks. So there's a reasonable chance you are triggering the bond on this, especially if you play this on turn 3. And then the other thing is the destruction deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ. Obviously, that's basically always a good thing. But the question is, how valuable of a thing is that? So, like, the way Japan control has been built previously, that's not that important. But maybe this is a new direction for Japan control to go in, where you play these defensive units that heal you and slowly chip away at your opponent, and then you finish them off with, like, the Tonys and the Heians, and stuff. And also, like, again, if you play only this, if you play only Ninth Guards Regiment, as your only bond card in your deck, I'm not saying that's what you're going to do, but if you do, if you play all 3, you take 6 damage if you don't deactivate the bond on any of them, but you also heal 6. So they actually kind of go even if you hit the bond on everything. And obviously, if you deactivate the bond on all 3 of these, then you're just up 6, and you dealt 6 damage to your opponent. And also, you played 3/4 guards, which are, again, not a bad stat line. So this card, very, very good. This card is going to live or die on the ability for a Japan control deck to exist. And I say control like, I'm talking like tempo control, unit-based control. That's not like aiming for fatigue. I'm not talking about like Soviet-style control. Well, actually more like the Soviet Italy-style control, where you run a lot of like blitz stuff and just like start throwing big things at your opponent. More that style of control deck. So like it might be like classified as a mid-range deck. Maybe it's like fast enough that it is a mid-range deck. But that is the type of deck I'm talking about when I say if Japan control is good. You're not going to play this in Jaggro, is kind of my point. But it's a very good card. Then we have the Key 67 Peggy. So Peggy is a 5-credit 3/3 bomber, 2 operation cost. We've seen a few different cards. Well, at least the Tenzan is this stat line. And its deployment is remove an enemy unit that has 3 or less attack, and it doesn't come back. It's just remove. So this is basically destroy, but they also don't trigger destruction effects. Like, it's basically suppress and destroy, but also it's technically not destroy, so it's not going to trigger when units are destroyed effects, and it's also going to trigger any when you remove stuff effects. I don't know if that's going to be a keyword or like an archetype, or if by Japan's theme is removing things, that they just have a lot of cards that remove things. But anyways, that is what it means by remove. It is just gone. It's gone, and it's never coming back. So, how good is removing things with 3 or less attack? That is honestly a little difficult to evaluate, because a 5-credit 3/3 bomber is trash. Like, this is not a good stat line on a card. Like, the card is basically hot garbage. So then you compare its effect to it's an amphibious assault, which is a destroy a unit with 3 or less attack. And that sees absolutely no play, and it's also 2 credits cheaper. So that makes me lean toward, and now obviously having a body do an effect is just better than having an order do an effect, and also this is slightly better than Amphibious Assault. I'm still leaning towards this card not being that good. However, it's very meta dependent. Like, if you're seeing a meta where there's a lot of cards like the naval, there's a naval brigade, the naval guy in Germany, like the 3/6 sit in the support line and burn you out naval card. Or there's like a lot of like other stuff like the Amur stuff. Basically, just like these big 3-attack, high health units that sit in the support line and like do stuff for your opponent's deck. Like, that is sort of the standard stat line is 3/6 for these like archetype cards, these archetype support cards. Now, if there's a lot of that going around, obviously Peggy is very, very good, because they pay 4 credits to play like an archetype support card, and then you pay 5 credits to remove it, get a body, and also shut down their like synergy for the turn. The downside is, or where I think the more likely situation is going to be, is people are just going to be playing really, really big stuff. Or they're going to be ramping, or they're going to be like having like 4 units you want to kill with Peggy on turn 5, and then Peggy is like 5 credits, remove 1 unit, and then this dies immediately, and then it's just worse Amphibious Assault. So yeah, I don't have high hopes for Peggy in this meta, but I also don't think it's like an unplayable card by any means. Like, it's better than stuff like Pete or Seiyun. Like, it's not an unplayable elite. Any elite that has deployment remove something is not going to be unplayable, but I think it's going to be like a lot like the Naval Brigade in Soviets, the 6-cost Naval Brigade elite, where it's an elite body that removes something when you play it, but it's just kind of outclassed by like other removal, and it's just a little bit too slow. You're not getting quite enough of a body for the cost you're paying. So yeah, that's one of my thoughts on Peggy. You might see it some. If there's like a lot of reasons to be wanting to remove stuff in particular, you'll see it more. But in general, I don't think this card's going to be that good. Just like thinking about the big hitters currently in the meta, and then the big cards that are likely going to be important coming up in the meta, I don't see 3 or less attack being particularly relevant. Then we get to a card for for Japan, which is Overpower, a 2-credit special order for Japan, which is destroy a unit with 2 or less attack and all other units of the same name, with the same name, on the battlefield. So this is interesting. So this is basically just like an anti-Brewster's card, let's be completely honest. So this destroys a unit with 2 or less attack, and then all other units of the same with the same name. So what this means is, if your opponent has 9 Brewsters on the board, and one is just the regular 1/2 or 2/2 Brewster, and then the other 8 are like 10/10 Brewsters for some reason, and you play Overpower on the 1/2/2 Brewster, it will destroy all 8 10/10 Brewsters as well, despite them not having 2 or less attack, because only one of them has to be 2 or less attack, and then it will destroy all other units with the same name. However, if you have 4 Brewsters of your own, and then you destroy your opponent's Brewster, it will destroy their 9 Brewsters and also your 4 Brewsters, because it's all units on the battlefield with the same name. Now, outside of Brewsters, like the only other way that this would come up consistently would be against the light infantry, like tokens deck, but also tokens has been largely rotated and is entirely irrelevant for the meta. So yeah, printing an anti-token card is kind of weird. And like I don't know if you're seeing enough Brewsters that you want to run Overpower, because destroy. So like if you ignore the destroy all units of the same text effect, is 2 credits destroy a unit with 2 or less attack good? And I think the answer is no. Like, I don't know, you just have better ways to remove stuff. You'd just rather play a unit that's going to trade out things. Like, this card is like, maybe if there's a lot of control decks that run high cost 2 health units, like there's a lot of like Black Watches going around where people start running the Churchill, that Soviet guy we looked at earlier, like the 70th Guard, something like that. The 2/5 guy that gives you guys extra combat keywords. Like, I don't know, maybe if there's just like a lot of higher cost to attack things, like maybe run this as a tech card. But in general, I don't think you're really going to play this. But also, there's like situations where you might just get absolutely brutalized by this card. Like if you're played Jagro, and you do turn 1 cavalry regiment to the front line, 15th cavalry. And then on turn 2, just by the way you drew your deck, you play 2 more cavalry regiments to the front line, and then your opponent plays Overpower and destroys all 3 cavalry regiments on turn 2, and you're going to feel really, really sad, and then you realize that it was actually just worse than playing Tora Tora Tora, because Tora would have done the exact same thing and then also dealt 1 damage to your HQ. So yeah, Overpower is just a very, very hard to target card to Brewsters, and not relevant currently in the meta otherwise. Also, it's interesting that Japan's theme is remove stuff, and this is destroy and not remove. Just an interesting thing that's worth noting. Yeah, the art on this card is pretty cool, though. Then we have Kanazawa Regiment. And the Kanazawa Regiment is a 5 credit, 5/5 infantry, limited rarity, 1 operation cost, with the text, when an undestroyed unit leaves the battlefield, deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ and give yours +2 defense. And now we start to cook. So what does when an undestroyed unit leaves the battlefield actually mean? Because this doesn't say when a unit gets removed from the battlefield. So what this means is anytime you play a remove card, so like you could play this with, I already forgot the name of the bomber elite. Like if you have Kanazawa on the board, and then you play the bomber elite, was it Peggy? When you play it, yeah, it was Peggy. Well, you remove a unit, and then you deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ, and you give yours +2 defense. So this could actually theoretically be an engine, because obviously the Peggy is not the most efficient way to be doing this. Because this also works with retreating units. And this works with retreating enemy units. It also works with retreating your own units. So maybe this is what you run with the German cards. The like self-retreat German cards, because if you have the Kanazawa Regiment on board, well, dealing 2 damage to the enemy HQ and healing 2 for yourself, suddenly makes returning cards to your own hand slightly more appealing, but this is very, very expensive to be doing that, and if your deck is built around this, it's presumably going to be a high priority target. So like, I kind of don't imagine a world where you do actually play this with the German self-retreat stuff, in like a dedicated German archetype deck, because this just can't be like the engine of your deck, like the sole payoff of your deck. But if you're just playing a deck with a lot of remove stuff, and particularly like removal based like control cards, this could fit into a Japan control theme where you're playing a lot of removal, both in the sense of cards that like destroy enemy units and stop them from hitting you, as well as the sense of literally cards that say remove unit from the battlefield. Then your like sort of win condition is slowly chipping away at their HQ with stuff like the 3/4 guard that we saw earlier, like Kanazawa. Maybe. My general thought though is just 5 credits for a 5/5 is really, really slow for this card. However, you might be able to trigger this like this doesn't have a once per turn. So like if you do play this on turn 5 and they don't kill it, maybe on turn 6 you like retreat 3 units and remove something, and then you hit them for 8. Now that seems very difficult to consistently do, but like I don't know, there's like maybe you set up like an L640 type of thing. Maybe you play this with Britain and you do tactical withdrawal. Well, no, tactical withdrawal wouldn't retreat them off the board. That would just retreat them out of the front line. Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult to imagine this card being excellent, but like I don't know. I'll probably consider trying it out. Then we have the card that makes me angry. I don't know if I'm going to talk about this card a lot, but I am going to rant about this card a little, at the very least. So this is the first Kennis. I probably butchered that. Kennis does not sound particularly, like, Slavic. But I also don't know how the Slavic pronunciation of this word would be. So the 61st Kennis is a 3-credit infantry for Soviets, special rarity, 4/4 stat line. And we've seen 3-credit 4/4 stat line a lot. There's a 3-credit 4/4 vanilla stat line for US standard rarity in the base set. Now this is not a 3-credit 4/4 vanilla stat line. This is a 3-credit 4/4 ambush. Okay, 3-credit 4/4 ambush. Obviously just straight up power creep, but whatever. And guard. I'm sorry, 3-credit 4/4 ambush guard. 3-credit 4/4 ambush guard. That's insane. That is absolutely insane. 3-credit 4/4 ambush guard is the most power crept card, like just like individual. Like I'm not saying it's like the strongest card. I'm saying just like on a purely like undeniable numerical level, the most power crept card we have seen in this game. 3-credit 4/4 ambush guard. We played 3-credit 3/4 guards without ambush in control in the past. Like, as I was saying earlier, 3-credit 3/4 guard is just like an adequate stat line that like you're gonna consider running if it has like any upside. This is a 3-credit 4/4 ambush. You can't trade into this with a Sherman. You can't trade into this with a Hellcat. You can't. This is an insane card. But there's one more keyword on this. And obviously that keyword's going to be Bond, right? Obviously that keyword is Bond, because the way Bond is printed in this expansion of overpowered cards is you put Bond onto an overpowered card and then it makes everything fair. Like 3-credit 4/4 ambush guard Bond. Right? That sounds like a fair card. Well, not really. It still sounds like an incredible card you would absolutely put into basically every single Soviet deck. But, like, okay, sometimes you take a damage, and then sometimes you take 2 damage when you play it. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. The third keyword on this card is not Bond. The third keyword on this card is Shock. It is a 3-credit 4/4 ambush guard Shock, no downside. Special rarity. Because also, like, just why don't we give the middle finger to all, like, you know, free-to-play players with small collections? This is unacceptable. This is, by miles, the most power-crept card we have ever had. This will be immediately put into every single Soviet deck. And I'm not going to say this card is going to be meta-breaking. Like, it's a 3-drop. It's a 3-drop that your opponent might just remove. Like, they might just suppress it, and then it's a 4/4. They could, like, tactical strike it. They could, they could do, like, any number of other things. They could turn it into a routed troop. They could hit it with a 5/5 thing. This isn't, like, a objectively meta-defining broken card in the sense of, like, this is going to warp the meta around this card. No, it's a 3-drop card. But this card is absolutely absurdly powerful. It is absolutely absurdly powerful in a way that is just patently better than every single other 3-cost guard that has ever been printed, including the previous one we looked at in this expansion. Like, this is insane. This is, like, actually, like, genuinely stupid. Like, if they came out today and were like, oh, sorry, actually Ambush was meant to be Bond, that was, like, a typo, I would be, like, willing to accept that excuse. Because, like, what is this card? This card is insane. Like, this card is absolutely stupidly insane. Like, you play this card and your opponent doesn't have an answer to it immediately, and they're any type of tempo or aggressive or mid-range deck, they just lose the game. Because it's 3 credits, kill something for free, and then also probably 2 for 1 your opponent on their turn. No downside. And it's a special. Because, like, obviously it has to be a special, because, like, this would be stupid as, like, a standard, because you can run 4 of them, and it's clearly a broken card, and running more of them would be better. But, like, I don't know, if you removed one of these keywords, like if you removed Shock, and it was just a 4/4 ambush guard, and then you made it a standard, are you going to run 4 of them in a competitive deck? Maybe. Maybe not, though. But at least you have, like, access to it at, like, lower levels. But, like, printing a card that is just so objectively powerful, and then slapping a special rarity on it, like, I know the rarities are intended, in part, to be, like, more powerful cards. Like, the more powerful cards are at higher rarities. And that is not just simply like you want people to spend money to get the higher rarity cards to get better cards, but also, like, it does have an actual game impact of you can run less of them in your deck. But also, like, the special cards are supposed to be unique, typically archetype definers, and they're supposed to be interesting. This is not an interesting card. This is, like, literally just a vanilla unit with a stupidly overpowered amount of keywords slapped onto it. Now, obviously, okay, let's talk about it in the context of the expansion. Soviet's theme is having combat keywords. This card has combat keywords on it. It has 3 of them. And if you lose Shock, it still has 2 of them, so it's still able to be buffed. Great, you can play the 1 credit +2/+2 on your 3 credit Ambush Guard Shock 4/4 unit, so that it's a 6/6 Ambush Guard Shock. Hooray! And then, I don't know, like, obviously your opponent can suppress it, or they can turn it into a routed troop. But, like, I'm not even saying that it's good with the +2/+2, because you don't need the extra +2/+2, because this is a stupid card already. Like, I don't get this. I genuinely don't get this. Like, I know that they have to power creep the game to a certain extent, but, like, they don't have to power creep it like this. Like, I don't know, like, in the last expansion, we got the 3 credit 6/6 Blitz 1-op. And, like, obviously that card was completely broken. Just, like, stupidly power crept. But it had the put a card from your deck, or from your hand on top of your deck. You could argue that that's a downside, and most of the time it is a downside. Like, the overwhelmingly large amount of time that is a certain amount of downside. Now, I think that most of the time that is a downside you are willing to pay. But, like, at least there's, like, a defense that it's not just power crept. Like, there's literally no argument to make that this card is not power crept. Like, there's no, like, oh, well, technically. Like, I don't get it. Like, unless there's a card in this expansion which is, like, destroy a unit with Shock, and then it's like, well, technically it has Shock, so it dies to this when you destroy a Shock unit card. Like, no. This card is absolutely insane. I genuinely think people would try out a 3 credit 4/4 guard in Soviets. If you removed Ambush and Shock, I think people would consider playing it. I'm almost more upset about this card than any other card that has ever been announced. Like, I know I've made big deals about cards in the past. Partnership comes to mind. Partnership, I said, is one of the worst design cards ever. Run the battlefield. I said was one of the worst design cards ever. And I stand by those. Those are absolutely awful card designs. But like those are awful card designs in that like you're making a card in a way that's just going to be horrifically unfun and just create toxic play patterns. This isn't like horrifically unfun. This isn't like a solitaire deck. This isn't like toxic play patterns. This is just a card that is so mind-bogglingly beyond the scope of their standard like balancing for the value of different keywords. Like, why does this have 1 operation cost? At least, like, put it in, like, 3 operation costs. So then you're like, okay, it's like a massive brick, but, like, it's difficult for you to attack with it. Why is this 1 op? 4/4. That's ambush. At least make it like a 4/3. Like, why? Like, this is... No words. No more words. We're just gonna move on. Then we get to a Japan card, which is interesting. It has fun text on it. It has not just clear and away power creep. Well, that's not true. This card is quite power crept, but that's a conversation that we will get into in a second, because this is the 106th Infantry Regiment, which is a 1-credit, 1/3 infantry, with deployment deal 1 damage to an enemy. So you get to choose. And this can go into the HQ. So immediately, a 1-credit, 1/3 infantry, deployment deal 1 damage to an enemy. That card's insane. Like, that card's incredible. Absolutely, that card's incredible. Now, there's some nations that card would be less incredible in, namely Britain, Soviets, and Germany would probably like that card a little less than Japan and US, but this is a Japan card. And it's a standard. Oh, by the way, did I mention that this card has 0 operation cost for some reason? Okay, so it's a 0 op 1-drop with deployment, deal 1 damage, which if your opponent went first and played like a 1/1, like they played a cavalry, or 2/1, this kills it, and then operates for free on the following turn, and is a 1/3, and you're a deck that wants to get into the front line. Incredible. Or you go first, and this just goes into the HQ, and it's just helping your game plan of run down your opponent. You draw this later into the game. It doesn't have blitz, can't get into the front line immediately, but you draw later into the game, just send it into the HQ. And it helps like a burn strategy. Oh, I'm sorry, there's additional text on top of this card? Okay, well, presumably it's like bond or like some other type of downside. Or, okay, well, what's the destruction effect? If it's the enemy's turn, add a copy to your hand. Okay. So this card's just absolutely insane. Now, I'm less upset about this card than the previous card, because the previous card is, like, insane in just, like, the most brain-dead way. This is still insane, and, like, it doesn't take a lot of brain power to realize that this card is insane. But at least it's, like, insane in a new and interesting way. Whereas the other one's just insane in, like, you threw on 3 keywords onto a high-statted unit for a low cost kind of way. But anyways, the 106. So this is just absolutely insane. And you could play this in a number of decks. Like, you could theoretically play this in Control, because a 1-credit 1/3 deal 1 damage is good for fighting against aggressive boards, and Japan Control has typically suffered in its attempts to fight against Control in the past. Or, sorry, to fight for board control early in the past. They've suffered with their ability to control the board early in the game. Now, obviously, the first thing that you think about is just playing this in Jagro, and I'm gonna break it to you, this card is really, really good in Jagro. Now, there's a world where you don't play this card in Jagro, where, like, if you're doing a more value-oriented, slightly more mid-rangey, less burn thing, and you want the stats, you want the shock, the 3-attack shock bros, the issue is that deck typically revolved around, like, running Blitz Doctrines, and Blitz Doctrine is out. So, yeah, you're probably just going to go back to more aggressive Japan with 106th. This supports the burn strategy. And also, this actually works rather well with, if we see more decent German return to hand cards, I should say. Because if you play this and you deal 1 damage, and then your opponent doesn't want to kill it because they want you to trade it off, because they don't want to give you an extra copy of it. So your opponent's going to leave this. They are not going to trade into it, if they can help it. And then you just play a return to hand. Because your opponent's never going to trade into it, it's going to stick on board, and then that's going to let you draw like the return to hand guy, and then you return it to hand, and you play it again. I don't think that that's like enough of a payoff to want to do that. I think you just play 106 because it's an incredible card without any like weird synergies with it. But yeah, 106, absolutely busted card. I don't know why this has 0 op. Like, this could have just had 1 op, and then it would have been like a very powerful card. Yeah, the power creep in this expansion is stupid. Then we have a card which is not particularly power crept at all. We have the SD KFC 250/9. It is a 1 credit 1/2 tank with 1 operation cost, and it gets +2 attack until end of turn when you draw a card. So theoretically, and it's a standard rarity. So theoretically, if you have 0 cards in hand, well, you have 1 card in hand, and it's Enigma, and your opponent has 9 cards in hand, and you have a KFC on the board that can attack, and then you play Enigma, you draw 9 cards, this goes +18 attack, then you hit them for 19, and it's incredible. Now that's like never, ever, 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 ever remotely going to happen. So I think this card is bad. I see a world where you consider this card, because like if you play this card on the board, it's a tank. There's ways to give a blitz. There's ways to buff it up a little bit. And then you're in a situation where like you don't have to draw a lot of cards with this for this to be incredible. Like you draw 4 cards in a turn. Like you play a Take Liberty or you Enigma for 4 or whatever you're doing. And then this gets +8 attack and you hit them in the HQ for 9. Like that's enough damage that you're probably going to win the game in an aggressive deck. And if you have 2 of these, then you hit face for 18. If you like play a Take Liberty and they can attack. Like obviously that's really good. My issue is they don't have blitz, and it's expensive to give them blitz, and they're probably going to be a relatively high priority target for your opponent, and they're not difficult to remove whatsoever. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't think they're that good. I think Germany, like the German tank deck, we saw Heinz get a bunch of, we saw Fast Heinz get buffed, in the rotation. So, yeah, I think that, this is going to be a fairly good card. I think that there's potential for this card, but I don't think that, I think Heinz is going to be a fairly good deck, is what I meant to say. But I just don't think that you're going to play this in Heinz. I think you have better stuff. I think the other 1 credit 1/2, the one with Blitz, the pack, from the previous expansion, is just much, much better than this. But that being said, people are probably going to try this card out. Hey, like, based on the 106th and the Kennis, I'm surprised that this isn't like a 3 health 0 op. I'm surprised this doesn't have blitz. Yeah, but we'll take what we could get. Now let's move on to the Key 61 ITEI, or is that 1 TEI? I guess it's ITEI, but I don't know if that's being used in the Roman numeral type of way. Tay. I'm just going to call it the Key 61, and the military equipment nerds will correct me on that. So the Key 61 is a 6 credit 6/4 fighter with 3 operation costs. That's oof. With Blitz and Bond and Destruction. Deal 3 damage to the enemy HQ. Give yours 3 defense. So this is a very powerful card. This is kind of the end game finisher for the sort of mid-range control type deck that we talked about possibly existing, with stuff like the 3/4 guard that deals 2 damage and it gives yours 3 defense. In that deck, you could just throw out the Key 61. This has Bond, but again, it heals you when it dies, and also hopefully by like turn 6 or possibly turn 9 when you're playing this, you have a much higher chance of not triggering the Bond rather than on turn 3 in a control deck. So like, this is pretty powerful. For 9 credits, you can hit the opponent in the HQ for 6, and then the destruction effect is going to hit them for an additional 3, so it's like 9 credits, 9 damage. Not terrible. You can run 2 of them. This is a pretty good replacement for something like a Shiden as like a finisher for a control deck. This is just a very powerful card. Now, Tony is coming back, and I forget if Bolster is in the game. I think Bolster is in Standard right now. However, there's no way to give it Fury, so like I don't know. People are going to play Tony. They're going to play Japan, US, ton of ramp, and then just throw in some Heians, throw in some Tonys, throw in some Key 61s, and throw big planes into the HQ. I don't think that's going to be a particularly good deck. It's going to have very good matchups into certain control decks, but I don't think it's going to be particularly good. But I think maybe Italy ally, maybe not. But I think a Japanese control deck that just, relies on slowly birding out your opponent, will use Key 61 as a big finisher card instead of cards like Kika or Heian. I think I've said this for a very long time. I think Kika is one of the most bait cards in the game. I think Kika is absolutely hot trash. So if you are a player who has been playing Kika in your deck, please take it out and put it in a Key 61. And thankfully that this card is just so much obviously better than Kika, all of the people will hopefully take out Kika now. My worry is they will play this and Kika and make their deck substantially worse. Then we get to the Kofu Regiment. Now, the Kofu Regiment is a 2-credit, 2/3 Bond Fury Guard. This is a standard rarity card. With Destruction, deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ, give yours +1 defense. So we looked at the 3-credit, 3/4 Bond Guard, deal 2, heal 2. And then the fighter with Destruction, heal 3, deal 3. This is deal 1, heal 1. Now, a 2-credit, 2/3 guard is not incredible. It's not terrible, but it's not incredible. Fury on it is interesting, but very rarely relevant, I feel like. And the Bond, that's where I'm not convinced. Like, I feel like this is the one that doesn't make the cut into the competitive list. Because on the one hand, you play this on 2 and it sticks, then you can play the 3-drop on 3 and don't take the Bond damage. And then it's just upside, because you don't take the Bond damage. You take the Bond damage on this one, but then you don't take it on the next one. So it's like you just played the other one, but then you got the 2/3, deal 1, heal 1. Down on the board, so that's good. My issue is you're not always going to be able to deactivate Bond, and then this card becomes really, really bad, because if you're running 4 of these, and 3 of the 3/4, and then 2 of the 6/4, that's a lot of Bond, and if you're not deactivating all of those, they get real high real fast, and then this card could potentially be a dead card in your hand, because like it's going to like deal 4 damage to you if you play it or something like that. And then it's probably not sticking around to deactivate the other bonds in your hand. So I'm just worried that this could very easily sort of hit the tipping point on the Bond cards where it becomes bad in the control deck. Now, it might not. And I don't know. It depends on the meta. It's also very weird because a 2-credit, 2/3 guard that heals you is good into an aggro deck. Like, its best case scenario is into an aggro deck. But also, dying to Bond is probably most relevant into an aggro deck. So, yeah, we'll see. I think if there's a lot of aggro going around in the meta, you'll probably see Kofu Regiment. If there's a lot of control going around in the meta, I suspect you will see no Kofu Regiment. Definitely the weakest of the Japanese Bond cards we have looked at. And then last but not least for today's video, we have the KV-1S. It is a 5-credit, 4/5 tank, 2 operation cost, so this is a slow dude, a limited rarity, and it has Guard Heavy Armor 1, so that is 2 combat keywords, and it has the text, your other units have +1 attack for each of their combat keywords. Now, I think this one is more playable than the 4-cost 2/5 when you deploy it or add another unit, give it a random combat keyword. I think this is much more playable than that, because this has immediate effect. If you have units with combat keywords on the board and then you play down the KV-1S, you will buff their attack immediately. And then they can attack with that buffed up attack, which is relevant. The issue I see is Like, why are you playing a combat keyword focused control deck, whereas Soviet Control just has good cards, and you don't need to play this? And like, I don't know, a 4 credit or a 5 credit 4/5 heavy armor guard, not terrible, not terrible, but like you'd probably just rather play Armored Train. Um, and this doesn't buff itself, so it's not like secretly a 5/5. Um, high suppressed target, but Soviets have a lot of high suppressed target cards. I don't know. I'm just like not super convinced that this card is going to be amazing. Maybe I'm wrong based just on the way things end up looking. Like, you know, you play this, Armored Train gets +2 attack. Probably not that relevant. They'll just focus on killing this. But if you have a Cossacks in the support line with Smokescreen still, gets +2 attack, and then you can trade off with 0 operation. Stuff like Katyusha will come down as a 2/2. The Machi will come down, or the Little Cobra will come down as a 5/5 or a 6/6, respectively. Now, it is important that this is not a permanent buff. This is not give units. This is they have. So if they just kill KV1S, then the buffs go away. So yeah, I'm not like super high convinced that this card is good. If the combat keyword deck is good, this card is going to be good. And if there is enough good cards being played with enough relevant combat keywords, maybe you could play like a couple of this in the deck as just like a little bit of like extra unit buffing. But just the way the meta works, has worked in the last couple of years, does not convince me that small attack buffs on a few units is going to be relevant for a Soviet control deck. Either you're playing against aggro and everything dies to your units anyways, or you're playing against control and like they're just going to play like crazy big orders and nuke you from space. So yeah, this card I think I'm pretty whatever about. So that brings us to the end of the video. What did we learn? Well, we learned that Bond is a very, very scary keyword that has a lot of potential to create poorly designed cards, and I'm very worried about that. We learned that this card is just fully mask off, flagrantly power creeping the hell out of things, with no shame. And yeah, I suppose those are kind of the main takeaways. Japan Control seems like the most of the cards we've seen so far. Japan Control is the most like realized new deck that is going to be using new cards. Everything else, I'm not convinced that they're not just going to be playing old decks with some of the powerful new cards in them. Germany's stuff seems rather weak, which is good because Germany's stuff currently in game is rather strong. So hopefully maybe they're just like power creeping stuff because they're like, well, we don't want to nerf Germany more, so we'll just like power creep the hell out of everything else but Germany, and then everything will be kind of on an even playing field. Maybe that's their strategy. But anyways, we are approaching an hour and a half here, and this is just just the first 19 cards that we've seen. Now we have a whole bunch of additional cards to look at, 68 if my math is correct. And all of these cards are going to be coming out on November 27th, so stick around my channel for more videos on those other cards as they come out. And as always, let me know your thoughts on these cards in the comments below. You know, correct me on my pronunciation. Let me know if you think I missed anything in terms of my evaluation. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, all of that down below in the comments, or join my Discord and have the conversation over there. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Subscribe if you haven't already. YouTube things, and I will see all of y'all in the next one.